For the News and Observer, I'm Dawn Vaughan, Capitol Bureau Chief and host of Under the Dome, and you're listening to our latest episode or watching on YouTube for the week of November 6, 2023. I'm here with my politics team colleagues, Avi Bajpai and Korie Dean. Korie is our higher ed reporter, so there's a fair amount of politics and higher ed crossover any given day, and especially recently. So the way I'm going to lead into that is with the campaigns and appointments and Beth Wood, if that'll draw you all in to keep listening. So Beth Wood, of course, is the state auditor. She is a Democrat, and she made a lot more headlines than her audits for what happened almost a year ago, where basically she wrecked a state-owned car in downtown Raleigh. And that played out for... Avi, you covered a lot of that for weeks, months, for a while, until her court date.
Yeah,
right?
A couple of months from late January until about late March. That story kind of followed her week by week as reporters kind of asked her to confirm what was going on, address the situation. She issued couple of statements, apologized for it, but more and more details came out, and then eventually she pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor charge, and then tried to sort of put that behind her. She said she was going to run for re-election after all this came out.
And before, which,
yes.
I mean, I guess she was kind of a given. The thing about Wood is that she really has a lot of bipartisan support. You know, Republicans and Democrats still showed support, saying they would let the court process play out. And then it did, and time passed, and things were pretty quiet, usual churning out of, like, regular audits. And then at the legislature this week, which you all that are listening who work at the legislature know there wasn't a whole lot going on, but a little bit, even though session, for all intents and purposes, is finished. And at the end of a committee meeting, our colleague Luciana Perez Uribe-Gunasi was there, and Wood announced, oh, by the way, I'm not running again.
Yeah.
So do you...
Pretty surprising.
Yeah.
She's been in that office since 2009. Under 3 governors. She, like you were saying, she's highly regarded by everyone, basically, in state government, all the different, council of state members, legislative leaders. So pretty big announcement to have her saying she's not going to run for re-election, and then having her race, which I was looking at, she had fairly comfortable victories earlier, but the last 2 cycles, it was kind of competitive. So that's another thing. It's going to be yet another competitive open race.
An auditor, not everyone pays attention, but it certainly, gets some high-profile candidates, which takes us to what higher ed and UNC might have to do with the auditor's race, Korie.
Yeah, so there are a few different candidates, Republican candidates, who have announced that they're running. But one is Dave Bolick, who is a member of the UNC Chapel Hill Board of Trustees. He's been on that board for several years. He was its chair for 2 years until just a couple months ago when there was a turnover in leadership. So yeah, interesting. The politics and higher ed crossover just keeps on churning,
Now, this is an election, not an appointment, but there's a fair amount of appointment changes lately. What are some of the highlights that people should know about what's been going on?
Yeah, so earlier in the legislative session, there had been the usual big appointments bill, and that included appointments to boards of trustees, and they had done the Board of Governors appointments even earlier in the session, actually pretty early on. But because of some bills, I think it's Senate Bill 512, right, which you've covered and I've covered, and then some additional appointments in the budget, I believe. There was another appointments bill that came out, included 4 new appointments to the UNC Chapel Hill and NC State University boards. Those will be the only 2 universities in the UNC system to have 15 members. The others have 13. And it also included an interesting pick for a special Superior Court judge, also related to UNC, that Clayton Summers, who used to be a vice chancellor and now has a administrative position in athletics at UNC, will be a special Superior Court judge. And he was part of the, I would say, controversial deal to settle over the Silent Sam Confederate monument at UNC a few years ago. So lots, again, that higher ed politics crossover.
Do we know where Silent Sam is now? What did they end up doing, I think?
I'm not sure.
I feel like somebody found it in storage, and then it's probably still sitting there.
Yeah, I'm not sure where it is. Yeah, the deal would have been to give it to the Sons of Confederate Veterans, but that deal was, and to give that group $2.5 million to care and preserve it. But that was overturned by a judge, so I'm not actually sure what happened to it after that.
I feel like the trail's gone cold on a lot of the Confederate statues as far as where they've been. And something that, I bring this up a lot, and I am again, is that about the time of the Confederate statues being torn down by protesters or the rest of them removed by the government, in the state capitol here in Raleigh, there were plans for the long-stalled African Americans monument on the state capitol grounds. And that was in the budget of 2019 that Cooper vetoed, never became law. And then it came up at various times, had been on a long pause after the Confederate statues came down, but was revived again in the Senate budget this year, but the House didn't want it. So that
The story continues.
really.
Yeah.
We'll see.
I should also mention that Clayton Summers was Tim Moore's former chief of staff. So even before he was at UNC, he had been involved on the political side, and now, it's just...
And there's another name on Senate Republicans that got a recent appointment, right? Blaine.
Oh,
Jim
yes.
Blaine.
Yeah, sorry.
There's a lot of people that keep track of
Yeah,
all
there's a
of
lot.
those.
Yes, Jim Blaine, Phil Berger's former chief of staff, is now on the UNC Chapel Hill Board of Trustees. So, yeah, lots of crossover there.
Yeah, for sure. The SB 12 that you mentioned was in court this week, and part of it was upheld, part of it is not. So we'll see how that plays out as really everything ends up in court lately. I wrote a story this week as we record this toward the end of the week. If you haven't read it yet, I went through all of the Governor Cooper vetoes and all of the override votes, and there were 19, except there were 2 more bills that are on his desk from the end of, we all know, for listeners, of course, know this detail, the legislative session, long session ended, but didn't really end because there's just going to be these one-day sessions and basically until the spring. So it's not officially adjourned, but it's basically adjourned. But, it may not. So that's that's just North Carolina government. You really can't totally explain it that. Anyway, of the 19, of course, the biggest one was SB 20, the abortion restrictions bill. The pistol purchase permit repeal was the first override.
Which kicked everything off.
It really
basically.
did.
Yeah. Laid bare some of the tensions at play with Republicans trying to keep their caucus united and trying to pull over a couple of Democrats, and then some of the tensions within the Democratic Party. That kind of was a pretty monumental part of session, late March, early April, right around the time when Republicans officially gained their supermajority with Representative Cotham switching parties. So
And then you mentioned monumental, so just props for the reference of monumental. We were just talking about monuments. And then the third one was how to talk about race at work and state government, and that was also pretty major issue, ongoing issue here, of course, everywhere, and then a whole bunch of other ones. So we started off talking about Council of State and State Auditor. We're going to take a break in a second. When we come back, we'll talk about what we know about the other Council of State positions and what's going to be vacant, what it might look like, and the changes. And then we're also going to talk about HBCU's funding and then our picks for Headliner of the Week. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. You're listening to Under the Dome. I'm Dawn Vaughan, here with Korie Dean, Navi Bajpai. We're talking a lot about Council of State races and appointments and higher ed crossover and statues and everything else at the first part of the show. And then now that we're back, I want to talk about HBCUs and something that we were mentioning the Capitol grounds a minute ago. There was a news conference on this topic, and you all have done more reporting. So what's going on?
Yeah, so this specific issue regarding HBCU funding kicked off at least a month ago, maybe even a couple months ago now, with the U.S. Department of Education, and I believe the U.S.
Agriculture.
Yeah, agriculture. Sending letters to the governors of about 15, 16 states, including Roy Cooper, North Carolina, about specifically inequitable funding between land grant universities in the state. So if you think about land grants here in North Carolina, that's NC State was the first one, but then NC was the second one. And those second group of land grant HBCUs were established because the first group didn't, they were
excluded.
Yeah, they were segregated at the beginning. Anyway, so these letters talk about the inequitable levels of funding between those two groups of land grant universities, and they found that in North Carolina, NCA&T has been funded at a deficit of $2 billion over the past, I think it's 30 years. So I think this is kind of an ongoing conversation when you think about HBCUs in North Carolina and everywhere, but specifically right now with these letters, the spotlight is on A&T, although there are several others in the state. So, and Avi, you covered a press event where they talked more about it. So.
Yeah, so the letters to Cooper and all the other governors was late September, I think, and then this past week we had a press conference here in front of the state capitol. Representative Zach Hawkins, who's a Democrat from Durham, and then a group of attorneys who said that they were hired to represent students or alumni of public HBCUs in the state.
Hawkins represents Durham, where major HBCU, NC Central University is located.
Yeah. So they held a press conference. Basically, they're kind of ramping up the pressure on the state, primarily on Governor Cooper right now. They did talk about how eventually all roads kind of lead to the legislature, because that's who writes the budget. That's who decides funding levels. This is a question about how much money the state allocates to these HBCUs. But basically, you have sort of pressure ramping up from these attorneys. They sent a letter of their own to Cooper and said that they wanted him to basically seriously address this issue, do a review of past funding levels to see, to kind of confirm that there's been this underfunding that's been happening, and commit to, taking some serious steps towards, at some point in the future, and this is what they were talking about during the press conference, it might, we just wrapped up a session, we just wrapped up the budget, so might have to be, short session at this point at the soonest, but kind of giving him like a bit of a timeline, saying, they wanted a response from the governor within 10 days, which is coming up just around this weekend right now, saying, they're prepared to file a lawsuit. And some of those attorneys have filed, a lawsuit's already been filed in Georgia. So this is something that is kind of happening all across the country right now.
One thing that happened this legislative session is they launched an HPCU's caucus between, both parties and both chambers. Yeah. We'll see if they advance anything next session. I know I remember when they started that caucus, one was John Hardister, who was the House Majority Whip, and he stepped down from the whip position because a lot of his time is spent running for labor commissioner. And as we mentioned at the beginning about auditor and the things changing at Council of State as a phrase is something that in North Carolina, I mean, if you're in politics, you know the phrase, other people are like, what? I've talked to state government reporters in other states and said, oh yeah, the Council of State. And they're like, that sounds like it's something from like DC Comics or Marvel, like where they all, and I'm like, well, they do meet at a large table and talk about, government. But anyway, so the big recent news is Agriculture Commissioner Steve Troxler announced publicly that he's running for re-election. This is a little more significant with Troxler because besides his very distinct voice and association with the state fair and tractors, is that, there were some like rumored rumblings that maybe he had thought about governor or something else. I wasn't sure if he was going to run or not. But anyway, he's running again. But big changes with, I mentioned Hardister is running for labor. The labor commissioner, Josh Dobson, is not running. Of course, Cooper can't run for governor again because of term limits. Lieutenant Governor Robinson is running for governor. The Attorney General, Stein, is running for governor.
It's a lot of open competitive races.
The treasurer, Falwell, is running for governor. So everybody wants to be governor.
Yeah.
Or they're running for something else. And then, of course, for Attorney General, it's Jeff Jackson, who was in the state Senate, and then this one term in Congress, and then Dan Bishop, who. So I guess people don't like Congress and want to be on Council of State instead. So,
Wow.
I mean,
it's the hottest ticket, I guess.
I guess so.
Council of State.
All right, so let's get to our picks for our headliner of the week. Avi's, yours has a little bit to do with what we're talking about. So what is your headliner this week?
With Representative Hardister. He tweeted this past week about how he had an encounter with a wild turkey, specifically the windshield of his car.
Not the liquor.
No, with the bird. Going down the highway, and his windshield was completely wrecked.
R.I.P. the turkey.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's my headliner, because I did not know until this past week that turkeys can fly at speeds of up to 60 miles an hour. And that for people in the Triad area, this is like a well-known thing to watch out for.
Wait, WKRP in Cincinnati taught me that turkeys cannot fly.
That's what I thought too.
No, I one time when I was a kid was, we had a turkey hit our car. It was not as much damage as happened to Hardister's, but
I
it
learned
can happen.
pretty two fundamental new things, that turkeys do actually fly, and that they fly pretty fast. So watch out.
But you can't, for listeners who have seen WKRP in Cincinnati, there's this, like, the best known episode was the radio station director, wanted to give turkeys out and, toss them out of an airplane.
Oh my goodness! Oh, the humanity! People are running about. The turkeys are hitting the ground like sacks of wet cement. As God is my witness, I thought turkeys could fly.
And so they definitely can't land from 10,000 feet.
They can't skydive.
Also this was a fictional radio show.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm sure our listeners want to, tell us all your turkey information. We could ask Jimmy Dixon, the representative who's a turkey farmer. I think he's one of the few farmers in the legislature.
Probably need a podcast episode dedicated solely to that.
Maybe Thanksgiving's coming up. All right, Korie, what is your headliner?
My headliner, very creative, is the cold weather that we're experiencing. I think
You're wearing a sweater.
I am wearing a sweater. This is, my mock neck, turtleneck season is here. So I love the cold weather. I love North Carolina, but some of these summers are brutal. So I'm very excited to be able to bundle up and layer and get my puffer jacket out.
All right, my headliner is also seasonal. It's basketball season, which is starting up, college basketball season. I watched on TV the exhibition game between Duke and UNC Pembroke, and I'm just excited for all things basketball, too. So,
Yep, go Heels.
Go Duke, and also Virginia Tech. And since we're talking about, Thanksgiving and turkeys, our mascot was originally the Fighting Gobblers, and also, I believe, a land-grant university. So just wanted to plug that. So, Avi, this is your opportunity to plug G-Dub where you want.
I'll refrain. I'm good. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you for listening. I'm Dawn Vaughan with Avi Bajpai, Korie Dean for the News and Observer. We'll talk to you next time.